Hi, I'm John Smith. Yes, it's my real name. Thank you. And I am the executive director of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, DSNI, Dudley Street, not Dudley Square, because that doesn't exist anymore. Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. And in Roxbury, North Dorchester. There are black people that do stuff in Boston. And lots of them are in this room. So, yeah, I've been the executive director there for, this is my third year. And they asked us to say something personal and then something professional. So the personal is, I am Trinidadian Jamaican and have lived here for over 20-something years. My parents immigrated here from the Caribbean. And lived all over, including New Orleans and Memphis and all the way down south, and came back to Boston for studies and all that. But Dudley Street, that organization, is a community land trust, and so we own over 30 acres of property in the Roxbury, North Dorchester area, and have have gardens, homes, apartments, a park, a couple parks actually. And we steward that land on behalf of the community that lives there. So basically anything that has to get developed in and around that area has to go through us first. And it's really us stewarding that land on behalf of the community. Want to switch to introducing the other panelist, Avery, who's from Atlanta. So, you want to go? And the personal and the professional.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you all. My name is Avery D. Ebron, and I'm the Director of Community Product at The Guild. The Guild is a black and brown owned cooperative based in Atlanta, Georgia. We build community-owned models of land, housing, and real estate. We also have a fund that provides the right type of capital to projects like these. And we also do some programming and ecosystem organizing work to really power these projects. For the most part at the Guild, my role focuses on our Community Stewardship Trust. It's a community ownership model that we've been developing. The acronym for it is the CST. And really the CST work focuses on bringing together residents in black and brown communities to co-own and govern properties in their neighborhoods, like affordable housing, grocery stores, spaces for organizations and small businesses. It's a model that supports folks to thrive in place and directly benefit from the development taking place in their own neighborhoods. Our first project, our pilot project in that model is 918 Dale Avenue, and it's under construction. Should be open next year. And when that happens, the folks in that community will be able to become community shareholders and engage in the upside of that development and governance, and we're really looking forward to that. Projects like these essentially is what brought me to this work personally. I was born and raised in Augusta, Georgia. That's right on the border between Georgia and South Carolina. And my great-grandparents, they actually came a little farther out into the rural area and were in a sharecropping situation. They did not have the ability to engage with education and things of that nature, but they were able to make their way to Augusta, Georgia, and they were able to get a family home that became kind of a centerpiece for my family. It helped to raise my mother. And even when I was young and sometimes things were tough with housing and things of that nature, there was always a collective and communal sense there, and we never really felt alone. But as time progressed and elders passed, those things changed. And when we had some trouble with family and people got ill and sick, my relationship with property and land began to change too. And I really just began to feel the opposition and the stress in my relationship with the land around me, and seeing that also in my family. And so just ignited a passion in me to want to change that and redefine that relationship and that dynamic. So that's what brings me here today to talk to you all. That's what's brought me to the Guild, and really excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Avery. Switch to Adriana.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Avery. Good morning, everyone. I'm Adriana Abizadeh. I am the executive director of the Kensington Corridor Trust. We are a neighborhood trust based in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. I've been the executive director there now for about 3.5 years. We are one of 2 neighborhood trusts in the nation. Our work is rooted in collective ownership and governance of real estate, both land and buildings. We are fully governed by the residents and the small business owners in our zip code. So 19134, deeply committed to that area and the 32,000 folks that live there. The average household median income for our neighborhood is $25,000 a year, and it is a predominantly black and brown neighborhood, making up 80% of the population in our 6 census tracts. And on a personal note, I came to this work slightly haphazardly. So I have a public policy background and started my work in affordable housing in my neighborhood. So I'm from Camden, just across the bridge from Philly, and my neighborhood was gentrifying. So my grandmother's house, or the closest I have to a grandmother, not by blood, was purchased through eminent domain when I was growing up. They were going to do a redevelopment project, and so entire swaths, and I mean whole blocks, were acquired, and my grandmother was forced to leave the city. She was not able to find other housing in the city and left. That project was then abandoned, and those homes were resold. And so the low-income folks that lived there in the Kramer Hill section of Camden, whole generation just displaced. And so when we think about gentrification, when we think about displacement, it is a very active part of my history and a very deep-seated worry of mine. And so the work at KCT, I have deep proximity to it, and I'm excited to be a part of it and excited to be in community with all of you here today.
Thank you both, Avery and Adriana. And as you know, this workshop is really around, as we're thinking about gentrification and displacement and all these different forces that are impacting us. And one of the things is, like, what is really the benefit of collective ownership and the community stewarding land and that kind of thing? And so we wanted to do sort of 3 big themes. The first of which is that we exist in an economic system that actually takes advantage of us, but that we sometimes participate willingly in. And so we talked about this in our prep around, you know, as we think about the work that we do and how we want to do this work and financing, that we have this system that's predatory, that we sort of exist in, and how do we shift that, right? So the first sort of big question was, what is it that we do with a financing system that sort of works against us? And how do we actually shift that? Are there ways that we can actually shift that? Are there policy ways? Are there actual sort of things that we can do to shift? And sort of jumping off of that is that we have this wealth conversation going on in Boston, and I'm sure it's going on in all these other places, especially around building wealth and black wealth and so forth. And then the other part of that question is, what does it mean to actually have community wealth versus our personal wealth? And sometimes that's a challenge for us, right? That we are so invested in our own personal wealth building that we forget that, you know, sort of historically, that we're extremely ahistorical, even sometimes as people of color. And what does it mean to build wealth sort of collectively? So starting with that, I'm gonna throw it this way to Adriana.
Great, here we go. So I think a couple of things. We, have had conversations about individualism, right? So we are in a capitalistic society that highly values the I, right? What happens to me? How do I feel about something? What does it impact to my bottom line? How about my household? And I think, as I've been working on the neighborhood trust model for the last 3+ years, one of the things that comes up constantly is like, are you inhibiting private, individual, generational, intergenerational wealth by building collective and neighborhood wealth? And for me, it's not one or the other, right? There's a unifying moment where we can realize that I can build wealth for myself and my family, which is important, right? I want to have intergenerational wealth for my children and for their children and onward, and simultaneously build wealth at the neighborhood level. Because the reality is, not everyone will own everything, right? So the KCT, Dudley, the Guild, we are not going to be able to own everything. There are limited resources, not because it is a scarce, right? We operate with a scarce mindset, but there's not actually scarcity, folks, right? There are billionaires. So the wealth is there. We just don't have it. We don't have the access to it. And so when we operate with that mindset of scarcity, we then inhibit our growth. We inhibit what we're willing to do, the risks we're willing to take, the communities we're willing to be a part of, the collaborations we will sit in on, because there is not enough. So at KCT, we are like head down. That is not the mindset that we operate with, right? We operate in a mindset that there is plurality. There is an ability here to do both. And so folks can own homes, folks can own land, and over here in the trust, I can protect assets and I can protect affordability, and we can steward things collectively so there's benefit for all of us, right? Including green spaces, because oftentimes that gets left out of the conversation, right? And in Kensington and in Philly specifically, we know that we are part of an urban heat island, right? So it's 20 degrees hotter in Kensington than it is in some of the white, more affluent neighborhoods in our city. We have no trees. KCT literally owns the only tree on the corridor, a 1.2 mile long corridor. We own the single tree. And I'm fairly certain that that tree is not to code, but don't tell anybody, right? Nobody has taken the tree down. We continue to prune and maintain it, but this is what happens, right? In neighborhoods where there's transit, where there are complexities around zoning, trees and greens get left out. But to the point around capitalism and the funding, I think it's important to shift the narrative, to have conversations about what is possible, and acknowledging too that you're operating within those bounds, right? I am operating within capitalism. Every single time I go to someone and ask them to cut a check to the KCT, there is some form or level of exchange and relationship that I'm building there within an existing structure. I can't undo the structure at this moment. I'd love to. I'd love to break down the structure and build a new economy. But the reality is that I operate in the one that exists now. So how do we take on the capital that is the least extractive possible, that is the most regenerative, and that allows us to think about community level wealth versus individualized wealth? Not because we can't do both, but because KCT's focus is on the collective, because there are other folks in our neighborhood who are thinking about the individual, right? If someone comes and says they want to be a homeowner, I've got like 10 places I can send them. KCT's focus, my head down on, is neighborhood wealth. And I have to stay in that lane. That's the lane that we're in, that's the lane I'll stay in.
And thank you. And we want you all to think, actually, she talked about the system. So we talked about the system a lot. We said, well, we have a really amazing audience. We want them to think with us how you deconstruct that system. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you actually take this system that is predatory, that has, we know, especially the banking and finance system, it's redlined us and kept us in a certain way. And then that's the system we depend on to help us change, right? So if we're going to be radical, thinking about what is it that we actually need to do, and we'd like to kind of throw that out towards the end. So write your thoughts before I come to you. Switching to Avery, same question.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo a lot of what you shared. I think that it's very important to acknowledge like where folks are, right? And I think it's what we've come up with over the past few years doing the work with Community Stewardship Trust in Atlanta with our communities is that, you know, folks are at a different level of understanding on this spectrum of even what is collective ownership. And so there's a lot of, just on the very basic level, bringing folks from where they are to where you are and trying to leverage what the tangible things that you're doing, the tangible things that you're providing, leverage that as a touch point for them to bring them along that basis, right? So, for example, with the work that we're doing in the neighborhood that we're doing, we're bringing in affordable housing, we're bringing in a grocery store where there are no grocery stores anywhere nearby. These are things that everyone can benefit from. These are things that were expressly asked for and needed, right, by all the folks in the community. And so we try to use those things as an anchor point and bring them in from there and have the conversation about how did we bring this together? How did we organize the funds to be able to do this project on this block, whereas this building has been vacant for so long? And really use that as a touch point and a teaching moment around how the collective wealth, how the shared ownership model works and why it's important, and how it actually has allowed us to get here today. And so that does come up a lot of, hey, like, is this in opposition with, you know, my personal wealth building? In Atlanta, for example, there's a lot of single family housing. And as I shared even with, you know, my ancestors, my elders, a lot of folks have sacrificed a lot to, you know, get that single family home. There's a lot of charged energy into that conversation. And anything that, you know, you pose as an opposition to what great grandfather provided is tough. So as was shared, we really want to pose it as, hey, this isn't in opposition to that. We have a whole swath of needs in this community, and we're here to focus on the collective well-being of everyone. We want to bring assets that address each of these things, and there are different models that can do that. For example, this is what we're bringing to you. we're asking you for it. We're asking you what you want and how you need it. And so this is the benefit of us doing it together. And so just to add to what you shared, I think it's very important to just meet folks where they are, having some empathy and acknowledging the stress that they're in, and having that conversation in a really cared way, having that conversation consistently, and having it within a context in a way that they can understand it, such that you're bite by bite invited into what a concept is that's it's a lot to take in the first moment. And we've just learned to, bring folks along that spectrum, folks who are more into it, who are more, hey, I really want this right now, starting with those folks to build that foundation. And then, leaning on those folks as well to help you to talk to those other folks who may be in more opposition to the work that you're doing, and, kind of use that as a means of, having a little bit more opportunity to build trust as you're going along the process of building your work. Our building is not open yet in Atlanta, and so really excited to see what happens when folks can actually come in and touch and feel the space. I think that also is a really key part of this, is being able to show them like the results of the collective model, being able to show them and give them something that they can trust and lean on. And I know you asked about capital as well, and just really briefly, I'll say when we talk about that capital, we try to talk about how the capital has been able to allow us to take the time to actually do that work, to take the time to engage and ask, hey, what do you want here? What are the uses for the space that best benefit this community? If you get the wrong type of capital, you can't do that work, that building at the speed of trust work. And I think that's going to come up. But the right type of capital gives you actually an opportunity to do that early on. And I'll just leave it there, and because I think I'm teeing up for future questions.
You are.
Sorry.
We at Dudley Street, we own 30 acres of land, right? So if you own 30 acres of land, you think you could get a bank to work with you? If you walked in and said, if you own 30 acres of land, owned and stewarded 30 acres of land, you think you'd get a bank to work with you?
Can we get a bank to
Yeah.
work with us? You should.
You should, right?
It's white supremacist society that we live in.
Yes, it's a white supremacist society. And somebody said what?
Are you still being redlined today? Are you still high risk?
Are we still high risk?
Are you in a high risk, originally redlined neighborhood?
Yes.
Because in a bank, if you don't have a deal structure, a bank is still not going to work with you.
Explain the deal structure.
If it doesn't make economic sense from their lens with enough margin, they're not going to do a deal with you. And maybe you might have different experience here in Boston.
So you're talking about risk factors, right? So you're
I'm saying redline is high risk.
Right.
High risk is avoidable.
We also have an example where we've put up houses, we've put up gardens, we've put up parks that people live in and have lived in for the last 30-something years, right? And have created a community. And so there's value in that, right? There's a value in that. But banks will not work with us.
Yeah, because
Right.
it's all about the bottom line for them. It's all about the money. It's all about how much money can we earn, not seeing the invaluableness of community and the strength in that community. It's all about the money. The bottom line is the money.
So I think the point we're trying to make is that, yes, that is true. It is about the money. But sometimes for us, it's about the money, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes for folks in this room, it's about the money, right? So let's also turn that lens on ourselves too. And how we respond to that becomes important. Another thing if banks won't work with us, who will? Philanthropy.
Yes.
Philanthropy will work with us. But now let's critique them. And I have I said philanthropy will work with them, but now let's critique them. And I have two of my favorite philanthropic people in the room. I won't look in their direction, but because I think their example is different in the sense that they have very much approached us as partners in this work, which is different, right? So as we were talking about banks, so between the three of us, not working with our organizations in a really healthy way, but also thinking about, so we go to philanthropy a lot, and what's our relationship to philanthropy? What's the philanthropy? and what's the critique to be made there? And as we think about, yes, there's a critique, but how can we help philanthropy work with us better? So throwing back into Adriana, because she had some very strong thoughts on this.
Sure, okay, so a couple of things. I think, one, let's call out that anytime money is involved, there is power. There's a dynamic, right? Yes, okay, that's one. Two, whenever I am in relationship with someone, I have to make a conscious choice whether I want to be in right relationship or wrong relationship. Yes, there is a gray. Let's leave the gray out for a moment. Work with me. Okay? You are either in right or wrong relationship. Is anybody familiar with the ladder of participation, the citizen ladder of participation, rungs of power? All right. So there's this working framework that talks about rungs of power, starting all the way down at the bottom where you really don't have power, manipulation, all the way up to where you have citizen control. So the folks who are impacted by the work are the ones who have to have or get to have the ideas to do the work, resource the work, implement the work, and sustain the work. All right, this is where I would like to be. This is the work I'm trying to do. Somewhere in these rungs of power, you will find yourself in relationship with philanthropy. And it depends on their mindset, their framework, where their dollars are coming from, what their values are. And I don't mean the black and white statements after George Floyd was murdered. I mean the lived values, how you approach KCT, myself as a human, right? I'm still a human in this work. You are a human in this work as a philanthropist, right? And so making sure that we are thinking about those relationships and how we are nurturing them and stewarding them just as we do the land. At KCT, we do not have banking relationships. Besides the bank that we bank with, which is Amalgamated Bank, that was after intense research on who was most value aligned to our work. They're based out of New York. They're a unionized bank. They have historically funded black movements and black and brown movements and have been a great partner to us as a financial institution. But we have no loans with them. That's just where we are holding our capital. CDFIs, I have one CDFI debt. The only reason I touched it is because it was a pass-through from CARES Act. So we were able to secure it at 0%. Outside of that, all of our working capital, both grants, right, so dollars that we don't need to repay, and our debt capital, which we do need to repay, is coming from foundations, family offices, folks across the country who are in the philanthropy space. We have been very, very intentional about the type of money that we take, because I want to make sure that the neighborhood still has all of the say. Right? Not part of the say, not some of the say, not the say on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but not Thursday and Friday. All of the say. So that means turning down money. That's what it means. It means being comfortable enough to say, whew, we really need this $1 million. I really need to push, right? I need to make this deal work. I need to push this across the line. But I cannot. Because the restrictions, some covenant, some way, right? I've had folks say, we would love to lend capital to the KCT, but we'd like to take a seat on the board. That's a no. That's a hard no. That's a quick and fast no, right? We are fully governed by the neighborhood. So you have to live in the 19134 or have a business in the 19134 to govern over these assets that are collectively stewarded for the benefit of a neighborhood that you need to be a part of. How can you steward for someone else? That's irrational. Right? That's like saying, I would like someone to take my single family home and tell me what to do with it.
That's called philanthrocapitalism.
There we go. It's got terms,
Philanthrocapitalism.
Philanthrocapitalism.
We have a new term for it.
New terms, right? So, yeah, so just echoing that, right? It can be very challenging to source capital for these deals. It can be very challenging to remain in right relationship with folks. And I think something that has been critical for us at KCT is just being transparent. Like, this is not going to work for us. We appreciate that there is capital on the table, but like, here are the reasons why. It is not patient enough. The interest rate is not low enough, right? Your covenants don't work for us. And that's okay. Acknowledging that that is okay, that it is okay to say no, that it is okay to say maybe in a while, right? So KCT right now, we don't touch capital beyond 2%. If the interest rate is higher than 2%, it's a no, because I can't preserve affordability. And that's what KCT was built for, to preserve affordability and localize control and ownership. If there's a risk of us losing an asset 10 or 15 years from now because we took a 5% debt payload, I'd rather say no now. because we want to make sure that we can steward and that we can live up to the commitments that we've made to the 32,000 folks in those 6 census tracts. I have to be able to sleep at night. That's, at the end of the day, I am human.
Amen.
Did you have a question?
Really quick, I'm sorry. Are all
fine.
of your programs trusts, models?
Yes.
Yes.
Trust.
Different
You wanna
types of
explain,
trusts.
Yeah, you want to explain how
Yeah.
yours is a trust and the different
Yes.
types of trust.
I'm happy to kick us off. So we are a neighborhood trust. So legally, our back end is a hybrid construct between a 501c3, so a traditional nonprofit structure, that is legally and financially tethered to a perpetual purpose trust, which is a very specific type of trust structure that allows you to perpetually protect assets, liquid or tangible, for a purpose. And the
You said it again.
Perpetual Purpose Trust. Yes, you are most welcome. And Oscar is in the back of the room. Next City has run several articles on our work. We also have everything you could possibly want to find about our work on our website. We are extremely transparent, both for the purpose of model building, but also being able to make sure that we are connected to and folks can access us.
He's hiding, but if you ever read that online magazine, Next City, he's in the back of the room right there. Oscar, go ahead. You wanted to say something? Okay. We are a community land trust, which basically means that pretend that this room, everything in the room, the floor and everything belong to us, and the chair you're sitting on belong to you. So basically, we own the land, but the houses belong to the people who purchased them, right? But here's the thing, it's a 99-year lease. 99 years, and you can only resell your house for a certain percentage of its value. That's what makes it permanently affordable, right? So you can't buy a house for $200,000 and resell it for $1 million. That's not gonna work. So you have 99 years, you can, and it's your house, you can, sell it to someone in your family, pass it on and all that, but it's a 99-year lease. And that's what maintains the affordability. You cannot sell it to someone. If you buy it for $200,000, you can't sell it for $300,000. You might be able to sell it for $250,000 and keep it in that range. And that's based on the improvements that you made, certain rates and all that. We don't go above a certain rate, right? Which is sometimes the critique about us not creating wealth. So, but what many people do is that they do resell, and then they resell it to buy a house that costs more money. They can use it as a down payment. And we're not interested necessarily, and I will say this out loud, in everybody having collective wealth, but what it does is that for the last 30, almost next year, it's 40 years, that this part of Boston that has this community land trust, when I mentioned that we're ahistorical, it was the community members, the folks who live there, and they were dumping there, and they were abandoning cars, and people were burning down homes, and it was the community members who went to the city at the time and said, we want to control our land because you guys aren't doing anything for us. And that was a community action, a community voice. So 40 years later, our board has 35 members, and you have to live in the community. You have to either live on the land trust, live in the community, what we call the Dudley Triangle, or have a business in the community. To make any decision, we have to go through that board, anything we do. So you cannot come and say, I'm a developer and I'm interested in building a 50-story building, and it's not gonna happen. So we steward that land on their behalf, and then we are, in all kinds of discussions around, how to steward that land, but also with the city and other stakeholders and our philanthropic partners, and building out mitigation systems for climate change, which we know is going to affect people of color, right? Thinking about, yes, the wealth conversation, and actually really doing a lot more research about how community wealth is built, and we're in various and sundry conversations. Those are some that we're sort of presently in right now and doing that kind of work.
So your lease is with the city?
Nope.
You said 99-year lease. When that ends?
Their lease, your lease, if you have a house, would be with us.
Okay.
Would be
That's
with.
the 99-year lease.
That's the 99-year lease.
So where
We
did you
own
get
the
land
land.
from? Where did you get the land from?
Where did we get it from? The city.
How did
It was an organizing effort by folks 40 years ago to get that land from the city. So they got the land from the city
Okay.
through eminent domain. It's the only organization that did that. So again, folks were dumping there, folks were doing, and the residents in that area decided to come together. They're the formation of our organization. So they got the land through eminent domain, and we've expanded that land through continuing to use eminent domain. And right now, we only have one more piece of property that we've gotten over the years to be developed. All of it at this point has been developed. So that's how it works. But yes, the leases are paid to us. You'd be shocked if I gave you the number of how low, really low, that 99-year lease is. It's not past 100. Go ahead.
So where is this area located in Roxbury?
Do you know Boston at all?
Yes,
It was in Dudley Street between Nubian Square and Upham's Corner.
okay. So, many years ago, I used to work for ACE, and we were fighting for Roxbury to preserve, a lot of the cemetery and a lot of historical parts, and then also fighting against the then Mayor Menino, who was trying to bring in a level 4 treatment plant on Malnia Ave.
On Malnia Ave,
Right, so
yeah.
we were working with the 10-year, it was a 10-year master plan that Roxbury had, that the residents had put in place of what they want their 10-year goals of how their property, they wanted the property to be used. And I know that the Malnia Ave area, I think it was mom and pop stores. So when you say that you guys got the land from the city, was this all in play with the 10-year, master?
No, this was 40 years ago. This was 40 years ago.
Oh, so this had nothing to do with
No,
that?
has nothing to do with that. This was, again, an organizing effort by the residents who were there, basically to say, this part of Boston and Roxbury is being ignored, and all the different things that they were going through, the crime and the dumping. And so this was an organizing effort. And so this is crucial to our work. Our work is centered around organizing. This was an organizing effort by the residents of that area, who at the time were just sort of tired of it, and organized and basically went to the city. I think it was Mayor White. Can't remember, but who went to the city and basically advocated to control that land, and that's how they got that. So that's the history of the organization. That's where it started, and still now we have eminent domain, and we control that area. So again, nothing. So our sort of mission is development without displacement, but we develop on behalf of the residents. So we will discuss with them and talk to, like, what do you want to see, essentially? If we have some land and we bring in some development, what is that community voice that they want to see develop there? And that has ranged, from parks, from, recently we just had one piece of land that we put out for bid and it's getting developed, and people started to talk about, one thing we don't have in our area is like coffee shops, and so they want to put that at the bottom of the building. And so, but they decide. It's not our decision. We steward it and we work on their behalf. So the community gets to decide how it's done.
So we have a model now, that we have different groups that create community groups, in different sections. I'm in the D4 section, and I have community group. And it just seemed like it's a lot of community groups, but their mission is so disjointed, and we're not really on the same page. Of course, we're gonna fight for the needs that we need specific to the area. But it's also hard to get renters to buy in that as long as you rent there, you're a part of the community and you're invested, to feel invested. And then we have so much overflow. We still have people flowing in from Katrina, being displaced from Katrina. And then they'll put them in, some temporary housing out in the suburbs. And then when they shut that down, they kick them down. They don't know what to do with them. All that to say, would you, I am over meeting with people and complaining. I'm over that. And I want to take it to the next level. Like, put your money where your mouth is. Do you want to preserve this community or not? And so would you be willing to mentor and shepherd a group of residents that want to take over their area? Because I lived in, behind Carver Den, what used to be Freedom Foods supermarket years ago, and I was able to purchase the house that I grew up in. But we got burnt out.
I want to continue that conversation, but I want to continue it after.
Okay.
So
all right.
we have, I think think we have some space
Yeah.
after, right?
All
to
right, so I just
continue
want to
it.
make sure that
Yeah.
I put that
Is that
out.
okay? Thank you. So I want you to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's my okay. So the Guild's a cooperative, and we try to be strategic. There are a lot of needs. We try to approach community in a holistic sense, and so we have more than one model. We have a community land trust model that we're incubating right now, and we did that in partnership with a local organization called Housing Justice League. And that model was to be responsive to what's taking place in Atlanta. As many of you might know, in Atlanta, private equity and investors are buying up more homes than just everyone. And so that's to be responsive to Southwest Atlanta, South Atlanta, where there are still some single family properties. And so that's why we're incubating that land trust and working closely with a housing organizer who's pushing policy, who's deeply engaged in the community to leverage what their efforts are and our side of it. Another model that we have is a bit of a hybrid, and it's not quite the community land trust. It's the community stewardship trust. And the CST is sort of strikes a balance between that permanent affordability that you would really focus on with the community land trust and also community wealth building. And the way it's structured, it's a public benefit corporation. So it's actually a corp, it's not a nonprofit. And the properties that we develop are actually property LLCs, and they go into that corporation, that trust. So when the folks in the communities buy shares of the CST itself, they're taking ownership share of the properties that are within it. And we can use things like bylaws and things of that nature to ensure that that property never goes back to the market, to ensure that there's collective governance taking place, and really stand on the principles of a land trust, but also create that opportunity for some wealth building to take place, because we do know that that's important to folks, but not to the point where it's extractive and speculative as what we typically see with real estate. And part of that lie that you have to juice up returns and extract from a community to bring something that folks really need. So that's what the CST is all about. And with that, we focused on a mixed use, mid-scale model. So housing, grocery, space for small business, all in one. Whereas the land trust is more acutely focused on smaller scale housing, be it single family, duplex, things of that nature. In Atlanta, there are really big single family parcels. And so if you get a parcel, you can not only have one home, but you can densify that lot as well. And so we try to apply those different approaches and be adaptive to the ecosystem and approach it from a community needs base. And I think, was there a question around financing with that? Yeah, yes, in philanthropy, yeah. So philanthropy is key to that. It doesn't work without philanthropy, and we've been the benefit of a great foundation who really engaged us in a sense of partnership, not opposition, right? Understanding that we're not gonna build this project unless it meets our mission and it hits those things that the community actually needs. If it doesn't do that, it's not gonna get built. With 918 Dale Avenue, our pilot project, for example, that building was a vacant commercial building, and previous models had, kind of wanted to push us into just keeping it commercial, keep it simple, keep it easier, but we know that housing in that neighborhood was super critical and super important. And so that made the project more complicated, more complex. That made the project need, philanthropy and foundations. But, the foundations that we engaged with met us in a sense of partnership and understanding what are you trying to do here and what do we need to do to make that work. I would say that's desperately needed. They weren't trying to box us into something or, just create a situation where it would not ultimately benefit the needs of the folks in that community. And so I would say patient equity is very important. It's critical. As we said before, it creates that time you need to really do the work in the community and get started. And the other thing it does is it unlocks the rest of that capital stack for you, because without that, a lot of the rest of the capital stack's not going to really be interested. And so what we found is once we were able to get that upfront patient equity, that's when the city is comfortable saying, hey, let me provide you with some sub debt, long-term, low interest. That's when community lenders or CDFIs and things of that nature are more apt to be interested in your project. And without that patient equity, that low interest equity, they're not coming to the table. And even with it, it's a tough nut to crack, I would say. Too tough of a nut to crack. I don't want to kind of get too deep into that, but it's just super critical for unlocking the rest of those funds that you really need to do the work that we're doing. A lot of the work isn't typically what real estate has been trying to push, whereas that's single family housing or that's very large scale projects that might be able to benefit from low income housing tax credits. We find that there are a lot of vacant and underutilized spaces in these communities that are somewhat of a mid-scale, but the financing right now doesn't really work for that type of project. And so philanthropy is very critical to make what is an economically difficult project work, and to keep it affordable for the folks who are there right now, and to really lean into that promise and mean what you say, and have the time to, as we said earlier, bring them along that spectrum, that ladder of what is this? We haven't experienced this before, we may not know much about it. Is it in opposition to my own position, my own stake? And really having a conversation of no, it's for our collective benefit, and it's to enhance the fabric that you've already created in this community.
You said a CSC, what does the S stand for?
Sorry, it's a Community Stewardship Trust, and the acronym is CST.
T, not C.
Yes.
What's the median income for your two communities?
The median income,
Yeah,
like the area median income.
Area meeting.
like for
Yeah.
your target, for the people you're trying to attract and advance.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because even that is a big problem, right? So in the Metro Atlanta area, the area median income went up to around 90,000, which is
Boston's
crazy.
higher.
Yeah, and even 80% of that is what people deem as affordable. There's a big gap between what the entire area median income might be and when you localize it to a neighborhood and the folks that have been in that neighborhood and who live there, what that actual median income is. And we try to target our work around that local level, and that's closer to 40-ish thousand, and with some ranges, because as you know, there's been some gentrification and displacement. So you have some folks that are pushing it up, but the housing just does not exist, and oftentimes the city can't create that housing at that level just using that AMI sort of dynamic.
Complication in Boston is that you have a lot of Boston, like Greater Boston, is actually owned by the universities. You know that, right? So when we think of housing in Boston, you think, for instance, let's model Northeastern University. Think of how much of Roxbury and that they actually own and run and control. That's dorm and science, and so to Avery's point, it's fluctuating, right? So we don't necessarily think about an income for our houses per se. It's more like an equity model, right? It's about 50,000, that kind of thing. But we work really closely with them, with folks, to make sure that they can get in and steward them in. The whole idea is to create a community, right? It's not to take advantage. It's not to be extractive, right? So, but Boston is interesting in that way. I mean, think about what the seaport looks like and what's happening down there versus what the universities in the middle of the city look like versus but you can go to Dorchester, and houses in Dorchester are $1 million. None of our organizations, I know Philly, Atlanta, none of us have $1 million to just buy a house. None of us, right? Or I see Meredith's in the room, the NCLT, another land trust organization. Do you have $1 million just to go buy houses? Or two? Right. Another land trust organization, and they actually, we can't do that, but there are investors that can do that. That there are people who are now buying up houses in Dorchester and Roxbury and turning them into condos and displacing everyone. So we're up against those forces. So when we talk about money and resources, and no foundation is going to do that for us, right? So how we work and how we have to work strategically, which then leads us to the other question, is how, and this is what we wanted to throw out to you all as well, coming back to that system question. This is great, right? The work that we do is great. Everybody's shaking their head. Everybody's agreeing with Adriana and Avery and watching me skeptically. But, and while it's great and while it's wonderful, it's not the dominant narrative, right? Collective ownership, this idea of, what is it that we have to do to change that, to shift that? That's one. And how, right, we were talking about how do we actually sort of implement, like it's great to thought partner and ideate and all this other stuff. What is it that we have to do to shift this dominant narrative? And we're going to throw that out to you, but go ahead.
So I think for us at KCT, one has been education, which Avery has also spoken to, right? The bringing along, if you would. And so on our site, one of the things we did for our community meetings is we unpacked the definitions of a lot of the nomenclature that exists within real estate and economic development. So like, what is a trust? What does it mean? Like purpose, what is purpose of a trust, right? All of those terms, equity, are all just kind of this like beautiful little one pager that our staff made. And so it's education and promotion, but it's also for us, it's been reminding us that this is the history of the work, right? Like this is not new work. This is work that was undone and that we are now having to rebuild. And because it requires working within the capitalistic systems, you're up against $1 million project, right? And the example that I love to give is that if I walk into a building, let's say I have a 10:30 showing with the realtor, right? And I walk through it and I go, this feels like a thing that could come into the trust. I now then go do the long game work of engagement, right? So, hey neighbors, this thing is for sale. The trust would like to potentially acquire it. Is this something that is of interest to you? Yes, cool. Let's run through all of I want to make sure everybody feels good. The private developer from New York walks in at 11 a.m. and they have a checkbook. My checkbook doesn't work in the same way that their checkbook works. I don't know why. I keep trying to, and it's just I can't find the zeros. So, right, like long game work is long game work. I am undoing hundreds of years of displacement, of oppression, of intentional disinvestment. And the developer just walks in with generational wealth. Right. And with the bank. The bank is their friend because they have the margins to make the deal work in an economy that says that we must be extractive to be successful, which is obviously not our mindset, which then makes the work harder, right? But I think the other thing I'll just note is that we are not in isolation. Sometimes it feels like we are. Sometimes I sit up at night and I'm like, ugh, why is it just us, right? Like, why aren't there more people around me, right? In Philly, there are very few folks who are thinking about collective ownership. We are one of 2 neighborhood trusts in the entire nation. There are lots of trust structures that exist, though, right? The folks down in Atlanta, we are in constant communication with the Guild, right? There's folks out in Cali, East Bay Prec, and I'm blanking on folks right now, but there's like other folks who are in this work. It is critical that we remind each other that we are not alone in this work, even if we feel like we are disparate and in different places, and the market is different, right? Yeah. I can buy a vacant lot for like 50 grand. I go to Cali and say that to somebody. They're like, you can do what? I'm like, yeah, yes. So like my money can go further, right? It's just try not to be isolated, continue to educate, and just continue to remind yourself that this is not new work. This is a redoing.
I'm going to come to you all, but I want Avery to respond.
One second, I need to interrupt y'all. Sorry, bearer of bad news.
Oh my goodness.
But, so we want to make sure that we are getting everybody's questions, so we're not going to take a hand raise. We want to make sure that folks' questions are being recorded on our video, so you're going to have to ask your questions into the microphone. But we only have 3 minutes left in this space. So, like I started this session earlier saying is, you will have more time after lunch to dig into your questions with Avery.
Are you going to tell them where we're going to be?
Yes. Okay. And Adriana, you're going to have time to dig into your questions. Also, we're going to get into lunch. So once we break from this space, go talk to people. Like, ask those questions, dig in with the folks, but we do have to wrap this space up in 3 minutes. So I will take one very quick question, and whoever can get to the microphone to ask it.
Grace.
And the crazy part is my spirit has been jumping since I was in that chair, and I wasn't gonna say nothing, but I have to say this because when I was introducing myself, I am a descendant of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and what you guys are doing, you are duplicating that blueprint from Greenwood, right? When you talk about the massacre, you think about just the massacre, but before that, it was Greenwood, and these people built an economy within an economy, and they did that without philanthropy, right? People, the people who came together to build Greenwood, they built it and they shared the wealth, right? And people invested back into that. When you wanted to come and start a business in Greenwood, you talked to those founders and you pitched your idea and they funded you. They bought land and sold you parcels of that land for $5 to get started. If you didn't have $5, they were giving you the loan for $5. So it's things like that. But our city councilor who sits right here, she's the only black city councilor in Tulsa, and Greenwood is her district.
Is that you?
She created a fund called the Power Group Fund, and so people give to that. $10 a month. So you imagine 100 people giving $10 a month. You do the math. In a year, you have what? And so we're using those funds to buy land back. And so what I'm saying is that we have to put our own skin in the game. We have to put our own skin in the game. And one thing I want to just add to that, just to give you some context and drop the seed inside of each of you. After the massacre, after the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, Greenwood was rebuilt by 1925. They didn't use philanthropy to rebuild it. It was the black communities, not just in Tulsa, but in all of the 55 black townships that existed in Oklahoma. That's what rebuilt it. So if they did that then in the face of Jim Crow, what are we doing? What are we doing? Right. We have to start putting our money together so that way we can rebuild, right? And that was in the spirit of Ujamaa and in the spirit of Ujamaa. Is it Ujamaa? And Ujamaa, yep. So let's put them together. Collective work responsibility, collective economics. If we can buy a coffee from Starbucks every day, we need to be putting that same type of energy into our land trust. So no, you are not alone, and you should never be alone because we all need to be a part of this. So I'm glad that we're having this conference today. This is just the beginning, and y'all, we gotta do better. We gotta become better ancestors, okay?
Thank you so much for that fiery wrap up. Let's give another round of applause for our speakers and our moderator. Avery, John, Adriana, thank you so much for bringing all of your wisdom into this space.